Nebraska Territory, 1878. The unforgiving prairie wind howled across the land like a hungry wolf, chasing tumbleweeds and whispered promises through a landscape that forgave no weakness. In this harsh country, 25-year-old Gabriel Whitman had learned one truth that served him well: attachments were dangerous. Love was a luxury for those who lived in towns with picket fences and Sunday socials, not for men who rode the lonesome trails where every shadow might hide a bullet with your name on it. Gabriel tugged his hat lower as he guided his palomino through the tall grass. 6 years riding as a ranch hand had left him lean and weathered beyond his years, though his clean-shaven face still betrayed his youth when caught in proper light. His shoulders carried the invisible weight of memories best forgotten, of comrades lost to frontier justice, of promises broken by cruel circumstance. A man survived out here by keeping his own counsel and trusting nothing but his horse, his gun, and the endless horizon. The moment you depend on anyone else out here is the moment you die, his first trail boss had told him. Gabriel had seen enough evidence to make this his creed. A cowboy's life was solitary for good reason. Bringing others close only gave fate more ways to wound you. As dusk painted the Nebraska sky in burning shades of amber and gold, Gabriel spotted a thin column of smoke rising from a homestead nestled in the valley below. The Easton place. He'd passed it before, noting its sturdy construction and careful placement near the creek. Old Man Easton had been smart, building where he had natural water in a defensible position against the ridge. Gabriel had heard in town the old man had died last winter. He'd figured the place would be abandoned by spring. The smoke suggested otherwise. Gabriel wasn't looking for company, but the coming storm on the horizon left him little choice. His supplies were running low, and shelter would be welcome. Perhaps whoever had taken over the Easton place would trade a meal for news from the nearest settlement at Fort Kearney. He guided his horse toward the homestead, his free hand resting instinctively near his Colt revolver. As he approached, he saw a slender figure wrestling with a stubborn water pump. A young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with honey-blonde hair escaping from beneath a simple bonnet. Her blue calico dress was practical but couldn't hide her graceful movements as she fought with the rusted mechanism. A smear of dirt crossed one cheek, and frustration had brought high color to her face. Gabriel remained in his saddle, keeping a respectful distance. "Evening, ma'am." The woman startled, spinning around with a wrench clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her eyes, the clear blue of a summer sky, widened with alarm, then narrowed with suspicion. "State your business," she said, her voice steady despite the white-knuckled grip on her makeshift weapon. "Just passing through. Storm's coming. Thought I might ask about shelter for the night in your barn. I can pay, or work for it." Gabriel kept his hands visible, his tone neutral. The woman studied him with an intensity that suggested she'd learned caution the hard way. Gabriel recognized the look. It was the same one he saw in his shaving mirror. Someone who'd learned that trust was a luxury few could afford out here. "I'm Willow Easton," she finally said, lowering the wrench slightly. "This was my father's place." "Gabriel Whitman. I'm sorry about your father. I heard he was a good man." Something flickered across her face. Grief, perhaps, or wariness at his knowledge of her situation. "The barn's open. You can stable your horse there. But you'll sleep there too. The house is not open to strangers." Gabriel nodded, respecting her caution. "That's more than fair. Thank you, Miss Easton." As he dismounted, a violent crack of thunder split the air. The storm was moving faster than he'd anticipated. His horse shied nervously. "That pump giving you trouble?" Gabriel asked, nodding toward the rusty contraption. Willow's shoulders stiffened. "I can manage." "Never said you couldn't. But that storm's coming fast, and 4 hands work quicker than 2. Their eyes met across the yard, a silent assessment passing between them. Gabriel saw pride warring with practicality in her expression. "The seal's gone bad," she finally said. "I need water before the storm hits." Gabriel approached slowly, careful to telegraph his movements. Together, they worked on the pump, their hands occasionally brushing as they replaced the worn leather washer. Each accidental touch seemed to startle Willow, and she withdrew as though burned. Gabriel pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the task at hand. When water finally gushed from the spout, Willow's face transformed with a smile that hit Gabriel with unexpected force. For a moment, the harsh lines of frontier life softened. revealing the young woman beneath the hardened exterior. "Thank you," she said, the words seeming unfamiliar on her tongue. The skies opened then, sending them both running. Gabriel to the barn with his horse, Willow to the house with her filled buckets. As he settled his palomino in a stall, Gabriel tried to shake the lingering impression of Willow Easton's smile. Getting involved in a lone woman's struggles on the frontier was asking for complications, and complications got men killed. The barn was solid but showed signs of neglect since the old man's passing. As rain hammered the roof, Gabriel found himself wondering how Willow managed alone. Most women who lost their menfolk either remarried quickly or returned east. Surviving solo on the frontier took more than determination. It took a kind of fierce independence that few possessed. A sudden crash from the direction of the house cut through the storm's noise. Gabriel's hand flew to his pistol as he peered through the barn door. Through the curtain of rain, he saw the porch roof had partially collapsed under the weight of water and rotted wood. Willow stood in the doorway, attempting to clear debris while rain soaked her to the skin. Without thinking, Gabriel sprinted across the yard. "Get inside," he shouted over the storm. "I'll secure what I can." For once, Willow didn't argue. Together, they worked to shore up the remaining structure, Gabriel using his strength to brace the wooden supports while Willow gathered tools from the house. The storm raged around them, but they managed to stabilize the porch enough to prevent further collapse. Soaked through and shivering, they stood in the doorway surveying their handiwork. "You'd better come in," Willow said, not meeting his eyes. "Just until the storm passes." The interior of the Easton home was modest but tidy. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of something savory simmered in a pot nearby. Gabriel stood awkwardly just inside the door, acutely aware of the puddle forming beneath him. "There are some of my father's clothes in that chest," Willow said, pointing to a wooden trunk. "They might fit you well enough until yours dry." While Willow disappeared behind a curtained alcove to change, Gabriel quickly switched into the borrowed garments, rough homespun pants, and a faded flannel shirt that strained slightly across his shoulders. He hung his soaked clothing near the fire and sat gingerly on the edge of a wooden chair, feeling strangely vulnerable without his gun belt. When Willow emerged in a fresh dress, her damp hair hanging in a thick braid down her back, she seemed younger somehow, more vulnerable. "I was making stew," she said, moving to the hearth. "I suppose there's enough for two." Gabriel wanted to refuse, to maintain the distance that kept him safe. But hunger and the lure of hot food won out. "I appreciate it." They ate in silence at first, the storm providing percussion to their meal. Eventually, Gabriel's curiosity got the better of him. "How long have you been managing alone?" he asked. Willow's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "4 months, 1 week, and 3 days. The precision of her answer spoke volumes. "No family to help, none that would come to Nebraska." Her tone closed the subject. "And you? Where are you headed?" "Wyoming Territory. Got a job offer at a ranch near Laramie." "Alone?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than its single word suggested. Gabriel nodded. "Always have been. Safer that way." Something like recognition flashed in Willow's eyes. "Yes, people are unpredictable. That's one word for it," Gabriel agreed. As the evening wore on, the storm showed no signs of abating. Against his better judgment, Gabriel found himself helping Willow with small repairs around the house. A loose floorboard here, a sticky door there. Each completed task seemed to lower her guard incrementally, though she maintained a careful distance between them. When exhaustion finally claimed them both, Willow reluctantly offered Gabriel the worn sofa while she retreated to the bedroom. Gabriel lay awake long after she'd gone, listening to the storm and wondering about the circumstances that had left such a young woman alone in this wild country. There was a story there, one written in the wary glances and careful movements that suggested she'd learned harsh lessons. Much like himself, morning broke clear and calm, the storm having washed the world clean. Gabriel stepped outside to check on his horse and found Willow already in the yard, surveying the storm damage. In the clear light of day, he noticed details he'd missed before. The slight limp when she walked, the way her right hand occasionally trembled when she thought no one was watching. "Your porch will need proper repair before the next storm," Gabriel said, approaching slowly. "Those supports won't hold through another downpour." Willow nodded, her expression closed. "I'll manage." "I didn't say you wouldn't." Gabriel paused, weighing his words. But I could help before I move on. Wouldn't take more than a day. Suspicion clouded her features. And what would you want in return? The question stung more than it should have. Nothing. Considerate payment for the meal and shelter. Their eyes met, and Gabriel saw the internal struggle playing out behind her careful expression. Pride warred with practicality, independence with necessity. One day, she finally conceded. Then you'll be on your way. Gabriel nodded, already calculating the materials they'd need. As they worked side by side rebuilding the porch, an uneasy silence settled between them. Not unfriendly, but guarded. By midday, the heat had grown oppressive, and Gabriel removed his borrowed shirt, working in his undershirt as sweat trickled down his back. He caught Willow watching him once. Her gaze quickly averted when he turned. Something about her scrutiny felt different from the suspicious glances of the night before, something that stirred an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. When he helped her lift a heavy beam into place, his hands brushed hers, and she didn't immediately pull away. Progress, of a sort. As the sun began its westward descent, they stood back to admire their handiwork. The porch stood solid once more, reinforced and properly braced against future storms. It's good work, Willow admitted, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Thank you. Happy to help, Gabriel replied, surprised to find he meant it. I should see to my horse if I'm to make decent distance before nightfall. Something like disappointment flickered across Willow's face, quickly masked. Of course. Gabriel collected his now dry clothes and changed in the barn, trying to ignore the strange reluctance he felt at the prospect of leaving. The open trail had always called to him before. Why did it suddenly feel like an obligation rather than freedom? As he saddled his palomino, a commotion from the direction of the house caught his attention. Raised voices, a man's angry shout. Gabriel's hand went instinctively to his holster as he moved cautiously toward the sound. 3 men on horseback had surrounded Willow in the yard. Their unkempt appearance and the way they leaned menacingly from their saddles sent warning signals up Gabriel's spine. The largest of them, a burly man with a filthy beard, was gesturing angrily at the house. Told you last month, girl. Your pa owed us. Now that he's gone, the debt falls to you, the man was saying. My father owed you nothing, Willow responded, her voice steady despite her rigid posture. You're lying, Porter, just as you lied when you tried to cheat him on that cattle sale. The man named Porter spat on the ground. Ain't no witnesses to say what's true and what ain't. All I know is we're taking what's owed, one way or another. Gabriel stepped into view, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Seems to me the lady doesn't agree with your assessment of the situation. 3 heads snapped in his direction. Porter's face darkened with anger. This ain't your business, stranger. I'm making it my business. Gabriel kept his voice level, his stance relaxed but ready. Porter exchanged glances with his companions. You're outnumbered, cowboy. True. Gabriel acknowledged with a slight nod. But the first man who makes a move toward Miss Easton or her property will be dead before he hits the ground. Are you volunteering? The tension stretched between them like an over-tightened wire. Gabriel held Porter's gaze steadily, allowing none of his internal calculations to show on his face. 3-to-1 odds weren't good, but he'd faced worse. After what seemed an eternity, Porter jerked his chin at his companions. We'll be back. And next time, your guard dog won't be around to protect you. He spat again, then wheeled his horse around. Think on it, Willow Easton. Your pa's debt or your land. One way or another, you'll pay. Only when the 3 riders had disappeared beyond the horizon did Gabriel allow his shoulders to relax slightly. He turned to find Willow staring at him with an unreadable expression. You shouldn't have interfered, she said, though the tremor in her voice belied her words. Would you rather I'd let them threaten you? I've handled Porter before. Handle them how? Gabriel asked. They didn't seem like men who take no for an answer. Willow's eyes flashed. What are you suggesting? Nothing, Gabriel said quickly. Only that 3 against 1 aren't odds I'd want anyone to face alone, man or woman. Some of the fire left her eyes. They've been circling like vultures since my father died. Porter claims my father lost a large sum to him in a poker game and signed over partial rights to the homestead. It's a lie. My father never gambled. Do they have anything in writing? Willow shook her head. They claim the paper was lost in a fire. Convenient, isn't it? But they've been growing bolder. This is the 3rd time they've come. Gabriel glanced at the horizon where the men had disappeared, then back at the reinforced porch they'd spent the day building. Something twisted in his gut, the feeling of being pulled in two directions at once. "I should go," he said, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. Willow nodded stiffly. "Yes, you have a job waiting in Wyoming." Neither moved. "They'll be back," Gabriel finally said. "I know. Soon. Probably." Gabriel exhaled slowly. "I could stay, just until we figure out how to deal with Porter and his men permanently." Surprise registered on Willow's face. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." It was a fair question, one Gabriel wasn't entirely sure he had an answer to. The sensible part of him was screaming to get back on the trail, to avoid entanglement in someone else's problems. Yet something stronger held him in place. "Let's just say I've seen what men like Porter do to people who can't fight back," he finally replied. Willow studied him, her blue eyes searching his face. "The job in Wyoming? It'll wait. Or it wouldn't." Either way, Gabriel found he cared less than he should have. That night, they sat at the kitchen table with a lamp between them, formulating plans. Gabriel learned that Willow had been 20 when her father brought her west after her mother's death. For 3 years, they had worked the land together, building something from nothing. When pneumonia took him during the harsh winter, Willow had refused to abandon the home they'd created. "This land is all I have left of him," she explained, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table he had crafted. "I won't let Porter steal it with lies." "We need proof your father never signed anything," Gabriel mused. "Or evidence Porter is running a scam." As they talked, Gabriel found himself watching the way the lamplight caught in Willow's hair, turning it to spun gold. The way her hands moved expressively when she forgot to be guarded. The quiet strength that ran through her like an underground river. For the first time in years, Gabriel felt something crack in the protective wall he'd built around himself. It was uncomfortable, dangerous even, but he couldn't seem to rebuild it. The next morning, Gabriel rode into the nearest town, a small settlement called Hollister, to gather information about Porter and his men. The local sheriff, a grizzled man named Morris, offered little help. "Porter's nasty business, but he's careful to stay just this side of the law," Morris explained, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Runs a saloon over in Blackwater Creek. Rumor has it he's foreclosed on half a dozen properties in the last year. Always widows or folks without family to back them up. And no one stops him." Gabriel pressed. Morris's eyes narrowed. "Territory's big, manpower's small. Unless I catch him in the act or have proof of wrongdoing, my hands are tied." Gabriel spent the day asking careful questions around town. He learned that Porter had indeed established a pattern, identifying vulnerable homesteaders, fabricating debts, and eventually acquiring their land through intimidation or outright violence. "The Easton place is prime property," the general store owner told him quietly. "Good water, fertile soil. Been wondering when Porter would make his move there." By the time Gabriel rode back to the homestead, a plan was forming in his mind. It was risky and depended on Porter being predictable in his greed, but it might be the only way to end the threat permanently. Willow listened intently as Gabriel outlined what he'd learned and what he proposed. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. "It's too dangerous," she finally said. "If something goes wrong." "It's a risk," Gabriel acknowledged. "But doing nothing is riskier." Their argument stretched into the evening, Willow's concern for his safety warring with her desire to be free of Porter's threats. Gabriel found her worry for him strangely affecting. It had been years since anyone had cared whether he lived or died. "Why are you doing this?" Willow finally asked, her voice soft in the firelight. "You could be halfway to Wyoming by now." Gabriel considered deflecting the question, offering some practical explanation that would maintain the safe distance between them. Instead, something compelled him toward honesty. "Because sometimes a person gets tired of riding away," he said simply. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Willow reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his hand, the first time she had initiated contact between them. The simple gesture burned through Gabriel's defenses like wildfire. "Be careful," was all she said. The next day, Gabriel rode to Blackwater Creek, a rough settlement dominated by Porter's saloon. The plan was straightforward. Gabriel would pose as a land speculator interested in acquiring properties in the region. He would dangle the prospect of partnership before Porter, hoping the man's greed would lead him to reveal his methods. The Rusty Nail Saloon was exactly what Gabriel expected, a shabby establishment catering to men with more vices than virtues. Porter sat at a corner table like a bloated spider in the center of his web, watching the room with calculating eyes. Gabriel ordered whiskey and made a show of studying a map of the territory, marking certain areas with a pencil. It didn't take long for Porter to notice and send one of his men to investigate. "Boss wonders what brings a stranger to these parts," the man said, nodding toward Porter's table. "Opportunity," Gabriel replied simply. "Your boss looks like a man who appreciates that." The invitation that followed was as predictable as sunset. Soon, Gabriel was seated across from Porter, spinning a tale about Eastern investors looking to acquire homesteads for future railroad development. "Of course, we need locals who understand which properties are obtainable," Gabriel explained, watching Porter's greedy eyes light up, "and which owners might be persuaded to sell for the right price." Porter leaned forward. "I might know a few folks in difficult circumstances. Widows mostly. Desperate types." "Excellent." Gabriel took a calculated risk. "I heard you recently acquired the Easton place. Prime location. My investors would pay handsomely for that parcel." Porter's expression darkened. "Not yet, but soon. The daughter's being stubborn, but she'll come around." "What's your claim on it?" Porter glanced around before lowering his voice. "Old man Easton lost a fortune to me at cards. Signed over half the property before he had the good sense to die. Girl refuses to honor the agreement." "You have documentation?" Porter's hesitation told Gabriel everything he needed to know. "Had a paper. Got destroyed in an unfortunate incident." "Convenient," Gabriel remarked. Porter's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Gabriel shrugged. "Nothing. It's just good fortune for you that no one can verify the claim." The conversation continued, Porter growing more expansive as the whiskey flowed. Gabriel carefully steered the discussion, encouraging Porter to boast about his other acquisitions. By the time he left the saloon, Gabriel had what he needed. Porter had unwittingly confessed to multiple fraudulent claims against vulnerable homesteaders. What Gabriel hadn't anticipated was being followed. Halfway back to the Easton place, he became aware of hoofbeats behind him. One of Porter's men had tracked him, suspicious of his story. The resulting chase ended in a brief, violent encounter that left Gabriel with a bullet graze along his ribs and the unfortunate certainty that Porter would now be on high alert. Willow's face drained of color when Gabriel stumbled into the house, blood seeping through his shirt. "What happened?" she demanded, already moving to gather bandages and water. Gabriel explained as she cleaned and bound his wound, her fingers gentle despite her obvious anger. "This was a mistake," she said, her voice tight. "You're hurt because of me." "Because of Porter," Gabriel corrected. "And now we have confirmation he's running a scam." "At what cost?" Willow pressed the bandage more firmly than necessary, causing Gabriel to wince. "What good is evidence if you're dead?" Her concern touched something deep inside him, a place long closed off. "I'm harder to kill than that." Willow's hands stilled on his ribs. "Don't joke about dying. Not here. Not with me." Their eyes met, and the intensity in hers stole Gabriel's breath more effectively than the wound. For the first time in years, he felt the dangerous warmth of connection, of matching to someone. "We need a new plan," he said softly. The new strategy was formed that night. Gabriel would ride back to town the following day to speak with Sheriff Morris, sharing what he'd learned about Porter's scheme. Meanwhile, Willow would secure the homestead in case Porter decided to escalate matters. Neither of them slept much that night. Gabriel's wound throbbed, and thoughts of Willow's safety plagued his mind. He found himself listening to every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind across the prairie, alert for any sign of danger. Dawn had barely broken when the sound of approaching riders shattered the morning stillness. Gabriel was on his feet instantly, ignoring the pain in his side as he grabbed his pistol. "Stay inside," he told Willow, moving to the window. Porter had brought 5 men this time. They spread out around the property, their intentions clear in the rifles they carried and the determination in their postures. "Easton," Porter shouted, "send out that lying snake you're harboring. We know what he's been asking around town." Willow appeared at Gabriel's side, her face pale but resolute. She held her father's old shotgun with steady hands. "I won't let you face them alone," she said simply. Before Gabriel could argue, Porter's voice rang out again. "You've got 1 minute before we start shooting." Your choice if this ends peaceful or not. Gabriel's mind raced through options, none of them good. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Even if they managed to hold off Porter's men initially, they couldn't withstand a siege. There's a root cellar, Willow said suddenly. Behind the house. It has an exit that comes up in the woodshed about 50 yards out. Gabriel understood immediately. We can circle behind them. Willow nodded, already moving toward the kitchen. My father built it as a precaution against Indian raids. They slipped into the narrow earthen passage just as the first shots splintered the front door. The cellar smelled of damp soil and stored vegetables, the air close and stale. Gabriel felt Willow trembling beside him in the darkness, though whether from fear or anger, he couldn't tell. The passage was tight, forcing them to move in single file, bent almost double. Gabriel's wound screamed in protest, but he pushed forward, following Willow's sure steps through the blackness. After what seemed an eternity, they emerged into the relative brightness of the woodshed. Through cracks in the wooden walls, they could see Porter's men had surrounded the house. Two were attempting to break down the door, while the others kept their rifles trained on the windows. We need to get to the barn, Gabriel whispered. If we can get to the horses. Willow nodded, her expression grim. There's cover along the creek bed. We can use it to approach from the east side. Moving quietly, they slipped from the woodshed and into the tall grass that bordered the property. The morning dew soaked their clothing as they crawled through the vegetation, keeping below the sight line of Porter's men. They had almost reached the creek when a shout went up from the house. They're gone. The house is empty. Porter's rage-filled bellow carried across the homestead. Find them. Check the barn, the outbuildings. They can't have gotten far. Gabriel and Willow exchanged glances, their time running short. With renewed urgency, they scrambled down the creek bank and began moving faster toward the barn. They had just reached the structure when a shot rang out. Wood splintered inches from Willow's head as one of Porter's men spotted them. Here, they're at the barn. Everything happened at once. Gabriel shoved Willow through the barn door, turning to return fire as bullets thudded into the wooden walls around them. Inside, they raced for the horses, Willow throwing a saddle on her mare with practiced speed, while Gabriel provided covering fire from the doorway. We need to split up, Gabriel said as Willow mounted. I'll draw them off while you ride for town. Get to Sheriff Morris. No. Willow's eyes flashed with determination. We stay together. A bullet shattered the window above them, sending glass raining down. There was no time to argue. Gabriel swung into his saddle, grimacing as the movement pulled at his wound. Stay close to me, he ordered, checking his pistol. We'll break for the south field. The grass is tallest there. Might give us some cover. With a deep breath, Gabriel kicked his horse forward, bursting through the barn doors with Willow close behind. Gunfire erupted around them as they galloped across the open yard, bullets kicking up dust at their horses' hooves. Porter's men scrambled for their own mounts, shouting orders and curses. Gabriel led Willow toward the south field, where the prairie grass grew waist-high. If they could reach it, they might lose their pursuers long enough to circle back toward town. They had almost reached the field when Gabriel heard Willow cry out. Turning in his saddle, he saw her clutching her arm, blood seeping between her fingers. Her face was white with pain, but she kept riding, her jaw set in determination. Keep going, she shouted when he slowed. They plunged into the tall grass, the golden stalks closing around them like a protective curtain. Gabriel circled back to Willow's side, reaching out to steady her as she swayed in the saddle. How bad? He asked, his voice tight with concern. Just a graze, she replied, though her pallor suggested otherwise. I can ride. Behind them, they could hear Porter's men crashing through the grass, spreading out to search for them. They needed a new plan. Willow was injured, and they couldn't outrun their pursuers forever. Gabriel made a quick decision. There's a stand of cottonwoods about half a mile east. We can make a stand there if we have to. Willow nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line against the pain. They altered course, moving deeper into the sea of grass, using its cover to mask their direction. The cottonwoods appeared as a dark line against the horizon, promising shelter and defensible ground. As they approached, Gabriel scanned the terrain, calculating their options. The trees grew along a shallow ravine carved by spring runoff, creating natural cover. They dismounted in the shelter of the trees, Gabriel helping Willow down from her horse. Her sleeve was soaked with blood, but her eyes remained clear and focused. "Let me see," Gabriel said, gently examining the wound. The bullet had torn through the flesh of her upper arm. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening if they could stop the bleeding. Gabriel tore strips from his shirt, binding Willow's arm as best he could. His own injury throbbed in sympathy, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. "Gabriel," Willow said softly as he worked. "If this goes badly, it won't," he interrupted, unwilling to hear whatever she was about to say. "Listen to me," she insisted, her good hand catching his wrist. "If this goes badly, I want you to know that these past days, having someone stand with me instead of against me." She struggled to find words. "It matters. You matter." The simple declaration hit Gabriel with unexpected force. For years, he had defined safety as the absence of attachment, the freedom from caring too deeply about anyone or anything. Yet in this moment of acute danger, with Porter's men closing in around them, he felt strangely, powerfully safe in the connection between them. "We're getting through this," Gabriel said firmly. "Both of us." The sound of approaching riders interrupted them. Gabriel positioned Willow behind the largest cottonwood trunk, pressing his spare pistol into her hand. "Only if they get past me," he instructed. Porter's voice carried through the trees. "I know you're in there, Whitman. Come on out, and maybe the girl doesn't have to die today." Gabriel exchanged a glance with Willow, a silent communication passing between them. She nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding his plan without words. "That's mighty generous of you, Porter," Gabriel called back. "But I'm thinking the sheriff might be interested in hearing about your land-grabbing operation." "Ain't no law out here but mine," Porter shouted. "And I say you're trespassing on my property." "Funny thing about that," Gabriel replied, moving quietly along the ravine edge as he spoke, drawing attention away from Willow's position. "I was just in Blackwater Creek yesterday, hearing all about how you forge documents and intimidate widows. Sheriff Morris found it real interesting." A shot rang out, splintering bark near Gabriel's head. "You're a dead man, Whitman." Porter's voice had lost its false congeniality, raw fury replacing it. Gabriel caught a glimpse of movement to his right, one of Porter's men attempting to circle behind them. With practiced precision, he fired, and the man fell with a cry of pain. The exchange that followed was chaotic, shots echoing through the ravine as Porter's men attempted to flush them out. Gabriel moved from tree to tree, creating the illusion of multiple defenders. Willow, despite her injury, provided covering fire when needed, her aim surprisingly steady. Gabriel had just dropped another of Porter's men when he heard a sound that changed everything. Distant hoofbeats, approaching fast from the direction of town. Many riders, moving with purpose. Porter heard it too. What the hell? The riders crested the hill above the ravine, Sheriff Morris at the lead, flanked by a dozen armed men. They had formed a posse. "Porter," Morris bellowed, "throw down your weapons. You and your men are under arrest." Caught between Gabriel's deadly aim and the approaching posse, Porter's men began to surrender, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. Porter himself made one desperate attempt to flee, only to find his path blocked by Gabriel, who had circled behind a fallen log. "It's over," Gabriel said quietly, his pistol aimed at Porter's heart. The fury in Porter's eyes gave way to calculation, then defeat. He slowly lowered his rifle. As Sheriff Morris and his men secured the prisoners, Gabriel rushed back to Willow. She leaned against the cottonwood, her face pale but triumphant. "How did they know to come?" she asked weakly. "The store owner," Morris explained as he approached them. "Said a young cowboy had been asking questions about Porter yesterday. When Porter and his boys rode out armed to the teeth this morning, he connected the dots and came to get me." The sheriff examined Willow's wound with concern. "Let's get you back to town, Miss Easton. Doc Parker can see to that arm." The ride back to town passed in a blur for Gabriel. Exhaustion and blood loss from his own reopened wound left him lightheaded, but he refused to leave Willow's side. They rode double on his palomino, her back against his chest, his arms around her waist to keep her steady. "You're safe now," he whispered as they approached the doctor's house in town. Willow leaned back against him, her voice so soft he nearly missed her reply. "No one's ever made me feel that before." The simple truth of her words settled deep in Gabriel's chest, warming places long cold. Dr. Parker treated their wounds with brisk efficiency, declaring both would heal cleanly with proper rest. Sheriff Morris took their statements, building a case against Porter that would ensure he spent years behind bars. Reports from other homesteaders began coming in, others who had been victimized by Porter's schemes, now emboldened to speak out. 3 days later, when they were strong enough to travel, Gabriel and Willow rode back to the Easton homestead. The house stood untouched, though bullet holes pocked the front door and window frames. Together, they walked through the rooms, assessing the damage and beginning repairs. As sunset painted the prairie gold, they sat on the newly rebuilt porch, watching the horizon. Gabriel was acutely aware that he had decisions to make. The job in Wyoming still waited. The trail still beckoned. His old life of solitary wandering lay before him, familiar and safe in its isolation. Yet the thought of leaving brought a hollow ache to his chest that no frontier wisdom could explain away. "Your arm healing all right?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Willow flexed her bandaged limb carefully. "Better every day. Yours?" "The same." Another silence fell, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "The Wyoming job," Willow finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "When will you leave?" Gabriel watched a hawk circling in the distance, riding invisible currents of air. "I've been thinking about that." And he turned to look at her directly, allowing himself to truly see her. The strength in her slender frame, the intelligence in her blue eyes, the quiet determination that had carried her through loss and danger. "I'm wondering if maybe Wyoming can wait," he said carefully. "This place needs a lot of work. That south fence line is practically falling down. And someone ought to keep an eye on things, make sure Porter's friends don't get any ideas." Hope flickered across Willow's face, quickly guarded. "For how long?" "I don't know," Gabriel admitted. "Maybe, as long as I'm needed." Willow's hand found his on the porch railing, her fingers intertwining with his. "That could be a very long time, Gabriel Whitman." Something tight and guarded in Gabriel's chest finally unraveled completely. The belief that had guided him for years, that safety meant isolation, that connections only brought pain, crumbled in the face of a simpler truth. Sometimes safety was found not in walls, but in the person standing beside you. "I can live with that," he said, squeezing her hand gently. 2 years later, the Easton Whitman homestead had transformed. The house boasted a new wing, the fields yielded bountiful harvests, and a small herd of cattle grazed on the northern pasture. Gabriel and Willow stood on their porch, watching as the setting sun gilded their land in amber light. Willow leaned into her husband's embrace, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The open trail. The freedom to go anywhere." Gabriel considered the question seriously, his arms tightening around her. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," he admitted, caring only about the next mile, the next job. And now, he turned her gently to face him, his hands cradling her face. "Now I know that wasn't freedom. It was fear dressed up as independence." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "Real freedom is having somewhere, someone, to come home to." Willow smiled, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "You're a surprisingly wise man for a cowboy, Gabriel Whitman." "Don't tell anyone," he murmured against her lips. "I have a reputation to maintain." As darkness settled over the Nebraska prairie, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. Two souls who had found in each other not just love, but the rarest gift the frontier offered, a safe haven in a wild land.